Went to the post office today. Got a couple packages in there. I got these parts that I ordered from Aircraft Spruce. I called them a couple days ago and complained because I hadn't got my rivets yet. It's been almost a month since I ordered them. Well, I had some of them on back order, I guess, and they were waiting for the whole things to arrive before they shipped them. When I made the order, it showed everything being in stock. It took 2 days to get here after I called them, so that was pretty good. So I can get started on that aileron now. I also got those bolts that I ordered for the wings, so I could put the wings on, but the weather's kind of bad out here now. It's been blowing and rainy, and I don't really want to open up the hangar door and try to take those wings out of there by hand and maneuver them around to put them back on the airplane with the wind the way it is. We're supposed to get about 3 or 4 inches of rain over a couple of days here, so it's raining pretty good, and the wind's been blowing, gusting up to 30 miles an hour here, so that's not a good time to be manhandling those wings. The flap is covered. I've got it hanging up out of the way. Still needs to be covered with polybrush and polyspray, but there's no point in worrying about that till I get the aileron done. I got the rivets to assemble the aileron in the mail today. Well, I got the flap off the table, and I've got the aileron on there, or at least a part of the aileron. Well, I guess I got the whole aileron on here. But I took the spar and this trailing edge section here, the body of it, with the trailing edge on it, all those ribs and stuff, and I've got them clecoed onto the spar. I've got it clecoed together. And it's going to take a little bit of finagling here, a little bit of puzzle solving to figure out exactly how to do this. I know on the middle here on most of these ribs, I can rivet those ribs into the spar first, but then I got to figure out which rivets to put in here into the spar for the leading edge and exactly how to mount it, because the leading edge and the end ribs attach to the spar at the same time. They get riveted on the same time on the ends. I thought these ones here on the hinges did too, but I can see now that the ribs here for the main body come in and they get riveted in outside, inside, whatever, anyway, farther out away from the hinges than what the spar ribs do. These are the only places where the spar ribs get riveted on, is here next to the hinges and on the end. The rest of them just kind of float there. So I think most of these I can do with my hand rivet setter. We've got this pretty well laid out and pretty well figured out. The challenge is going to be on these plates here. These are kind of a gusset that goes over these ribs where these hinges are, and I think they help stiffen that up or strengthen that out in these hinge points. And most of this is going to be okay, but there are 2 rivets that go in here through this, through the spar, and down through the hinge itself, and those are going to be a little bit of a challenge. All the rest of these I can use the hand setter for. These ones here are way back up underneath there, and they're going to be kind of a challenge to get a rivet set in there. But the rest of this should go pretty good. The rest of it I can get access to pretty good with my rivet sets and my hand setter. Alright folks, got some real riveting action going on here today. Starting to put this aileron back together. I've got this main body back here, the ribs. I've got the first rivet put in the spar into the ribs on that. We're looking at the drawings here, the Piper drawings, and it doesn't really show which rivets to put in here in this spar and into these ribs, or in that leading edge into this spar. It does a pretty good job of showing other rivets, the non-standard rivets. So like here, where we've got the cover going over the center hinge and the control horn, it shows 3/32 by 5/16 aluminum rivets, or an AN 470 3-5. And over here on the side, it specifies what they are. Same with these places here where these covers go over, it shows the rivets there, 3/32 by 5/16. Some other places it shows some number 4, 3/32 by 4. Like here where this tube goes in there into that trailing edge, it shows an 1/8 inch by 3/8. That's a number 4 and 474-6 rivet there. So it shows those, but it doesn't really show in here which rivets go in the field of this leading edge and into these ribs here into the spar, the ones that don't go through something else. But when you get into the description here of the assembly, then it specifies AN 473-3 rivets for these here. So this is an AN 473-3 brazier head rivet. That's 3/32 diameter and 3/16 inch long. And just for a comparison, this is an AN 473-5, and this is actually an AD rivet. It's a little harder. Now, I've got to be a little bit careful with these soft rivets. They squish down a lot easier than the AD rivets do, the hard rivets. So it's real easy to overset them. I have to be real careful with it. I am able to use my hand rivet setter, and I've got the anvil here, the set piece that's dished out for the brazier head rivets, and I've got it set so that it doesn't fully contact my anvil. I had to put this real long anvil in there. That's the end that makes the shop head. I had to put this real long one in there so that it would go in around that flange on that spar and be able to reach the back side of the rivets to set them. There's not enough relief in this rivet set to do that, and I can't set them by hand like this. Can't really do it like that. So it has to be done this way with the handles out and set out. But that's going pretty good. I've got the main body of ribs there riveted to that leading edge on one side. I can flip this over and do the other side now. I can't do these end ribs here. I can't do this end rib until I put the leading edge on, because the leading edge has a rib that goes right there, and that shares the holes, that shares the rivets with that rib on that trailing edge section. Alright, I got that second row of rivets in on those ribs on that spar. Now, because of that crack and everything in that rudder horn and that center hinge, I went ahead and drilled a third hole out in there and put a third rivet in each one of those hinges there, because that all goes into that aileron horn there, that control horn, and kind of holds it on there and stabilizes that whole center section of that spar. So just to make sure, decided to go ahead and put a second rivet in each one of those ribs there. There's a diagonal brace that goes from those end ribs into the spar, and those take a number 4 rivet, and I think I'll rivet those things on there too, and that'll make sure those ribs are on there good before I start fooling around with putting that leading edge on there. Well, there's the new tip tube that fares out the tip of that aileron installed. A couple of number 4 rivets in there, 1/4 inch. It takes a 1/2 inch over here and 3/8 there in those two. That looks a heck of a lot better than that one that came out of there. Now I guess I can start putting the leading edge on there, trying to figure that out. Actually, I may have screwed up here. I may have supposed to put those rivets in there for those diagonals after I go through the leading edge too. That outboard section of the leading edge is riveted on. That all went on pretty good. I did have to drill out this 1/4 inch rivet that this rib was, or this brace was on. I kind of figured that after I got thinking about it. So I drilled that out and put a new one in there. There was one hole here that goes through this outboard rib and the leading edge and the spar that was a little bit oversized. So I drilled it out for a number 4 rivet and stuck a number 4 rivet in there. I've left these rivets out here where this comes in on this hinge point, because I'll need to slide that cover plate over that when I get ready to put that on. These ones here on the outboard end where the 2 ribs attach, the nose rib and the body rib here and the spar, I'm going to have to figure out some way to set those with the rivet gun. I can't get my hand rivet setter in there. Just won't contort enough to get in there. I think I'll spin that around and do the one on the other end, the inboard leading edge, get that one on there, because that one helps hold that rib on there too, and I'm going to have to drill that brace out of there that I riveted in there too. So the leading edge is riveted on, at least through the field of it, through the body of it. I've got to figure out how to rivet those ribs onto the spar and onto the other ribs, while the outboard ribs here go into the nose rib on both ends, and then we've got the nose ribs to rivet onto the spar where those hinges are. Now I've got to figure out how to do that. I can't do it with my hand setter when I have to do it with air riveter, and I have to try to figure out a bucking bar or something that'll get in there to buck those. Anyway, that's what's next, and then I have to figure out how to put those little plates on there, those cover plates on there. I got these nose ribs nailed in, the ones here on the end plates where they rivet through the spar and the other rib, and then here in each one of these hinges they just go through the spar. When I say I got those nailed in there, I'm not exaggerating too much. If I had any pride at all, I'd drill some of those out and redo them, but some of them look okay. I had to go through a bunch of different contortions to get them in there. I had to use my air gun, and I've got this real long bent set that I got at Boeing Surplus 100 years ago, and that was able to get in there kind of on those. And then I had this little bucking bar here that I was able to get in behind them to set them on most of them, but here on this center one where this control horn is, I couldn't get in there with that bucking bar because the control horn takes up too much space there. I was looking for different ways to do that. I was going to go down to the hangar and see if I could find a piece of steel that I could grind. It has to be at an angle because these ribs are at an angle, and then the rivet goes in there tight against that rib, so the bucking bar has to be an angle to fit in there and push out on that rivet. I decided to try something. I got another one of these bent tip rivet sets that I got at Boeing Surplus, a long one, and I used it, pushed it in there by hand and used it for the bucking bar, and that actually worked. I was surprised at how well it worked. I got the first plate on the first hinge. It's on the inboard end, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was able to use my hand setter to set all those rivets. It worked in there just fine. It worked good. So I'll flip this around and do the other hinge and get it all set up, and then I'll work on the center one. Well, that aileron is all back together. Hooray, hooray, hooray. These covers here didn't go as bad as I thought they would. I was able to go and get them all with my rivet set with the deep set on it. I was able to get all of those rivets set with it, and that was pretty nice. This center one, I got all the way around it, but I couldn't get in with the set on these two that go through the control horn and the spar there. It was just too deep in there to get in there with the rivet set. So the first one I was able to buck the rivets with this bucking bar here. I was able to reach in there with it, and it was thin enough to get in between these ribs and this control horn and get in and hold on it. But on the other end, when I did the other end, I couldn't get this bar in there. I was digging around for something else to use, and I finally dug around my rivet tray drawer, and I found this little one, which is basically a copy of this one, and I was able to get it in there on the bottom one and hold it against the rivets. Fortunately, those rivets are soft and they're fairly easy to do, where I've never been able to get them bucked. It's all together now. I'll clean that up and I can start covering it. I've had that flat practice on covering, so this is going to be pretty close to the same thing as what the flap was. Longer, of course, but pretty much the same thing.